Hey, Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Psyched to have you on here. You were on here, I think, do you remember you were on here once before, a long time ago?
In the early days.
Right at the start of the podcast.
Yeah.
Years ago. This is many years ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
So this is our second round here on here. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, excited to drop in with you in a conversation. We're going to focus on conflict and repair and relationships. And, you've got this new book coming out, which we're excited to talk about. So why don't actually we start with, to tell us a little bit about the book that's about to come out and, your inspiration behind it. And maybe you can lead us into the topic there.
Okay. Cool. It's called Getting to Zero, How to Work Through Conflict in Your High Stakes Relationships. And that's something I'm committed to in my own life, is how do I figure this out? How do I get back to a good place with my wife, my kids, you guys, if I get in a conflict with you too? Because I think our life is better when we get to what I call zero, which is back to a good place. And it's like a baseline that I want to live my life from. And I notice, maybe it's because I'm a relationship nerd, that a lot of people struggle in this area, particularly in their families, business partnerships, and intimate partnerships. It's really hard. Like the stakes get high and people avoid and blame and they do all kinds of things. And as you guys know, it's really bad for us, bad for our health. There's a lot of, I think, detrimental cascading negative effects on the body when we don't figure this part of our life out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe a starting point here is maybe just a little bit of your personal journey around getting to zero. Just a little, nugget of like, where'd you come from as a young adult to where are you now in terms of how you frame conflict in relationship and how you did. And well, why don't we start with that and then kind of we could dive into kind of the funness here.
Yeah, and I'm up for all of us answering that same question. I'd be curious about what you two would share as well on that. Yeah, I think my family of origin was pretty conflict avoidant, I'd say, for the most part. I remember a couple times bragging to my friends that my parents never fought. And I only have two memories of them in middle school fighting, but they would go down in the basement for some reason and shut the door and raised voices. They were really prideful about like, oh, we don't fight. But I think what they did and still do is compartmentalize. So I learned how to do that. And anytime a woman I was dating would kind of bring needs or a conversation that to me felt like conflict, I would push them away. And that was my MO for a long time until I started working on myself. And then I was kind of fascinated with how bad it felt and how could I get to a better place. And I was also really interested in all the personal growth communities I was a part of and meditation communities where people didn't know how to do this. And there was a couple of communities I was a part of that had kind of a system, but it was like hold a stick and just say what you were projecting onto the other person, and then it was supposedly going to be better. So I just had a lot of weird experiences, and I just got really committed to trying to find a efficient way for people and myself. So I'm curious what your guys' experience was.
Why don't you go, Will?
Okay. Well, it's fun to have this conversation with you, Jason. I feel like I started my journey of curiosity about, psychology with more of an academic curiosity about people and what makes someone mentally ill, or, what actually causes, what's behind the scenes when people are very disturbed. And I think for me in college, that was, it started out as a journey trying to understand my family and individuals in my family that were really difficult for me to understand as a child. But for me, it wasn't so much of a relational issue until I started having relationship failures in my adult life. And that's when I started getting really interested in how am I failing, and why are my relationships failing? And it's been a journey. I mean, I feel like I'm, at 51, maybe halfway done with my journey about learning about relationships and how I fail in them.
I hear you. Yeah.
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 Nice.
I mean, for me, I was very conflict avoidant as a child in my family. My family was pretty emotionally a moving target. So it was just kind of, there wasn't necessarily conflict avoidance in my parents, but I wouldn't necessarily say there was a lot of healthy conflict or like a model in my life as a kid, seeing it anywhere of like, what does it look like? Like, I don't know that I ever saw as a kid, maybe I did a couple times where I just like saw two people have an issue with each other and work through it in what I would call a healthy way. I don't know if I ever saw that as a kid.
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing
I don't
it
think
ever.
I did either. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
that's just like kind of right. That just alone is like, whoa, like we all grew up as kids and never even once probably saw just a healthy working through a conflict. I mean, that's obviously the world that we're living in, right? That's just not yet evolutionary perspective what is being focused on yet in culture, right? So where people know how to do conflict, and it's still we're young there, I think.
Yeah.
So anyways, I came from that, but I think that void when I was in my 20s, I was not, with the women I was dating, I always was the one to initiate, like, I want to talk about this problem. I was always the one initiating it, but I was very anxiously attached. So it was like, I was always anxious that, the whole thing was going to end, and it was desperate. And I don't think I could have been a very fun person to be around in my 20s relationship. I mean, I was so anxious. So, and honestly, like, relationship for me with new people is disturbing. It's hard for me to attach to someone new. It takes me a long time. I get very disturbed very often by them. So like, that's another factor. It's like, if I sniff anything that's just, doesn't work for me, or I think is slightly off, it's very disturbing for me with new people, which is why I've got a small group of people that are mostly on this call right now. Because it's just a lot for me. So that's my story. And like, and then I think being in a marriage and being in a partnership for 15 years, I feel like we're pretty good at doing, what we would call healthy conflict and repair. And, there's times we have issues, but I mean, I think we do a good job at it, and we've been learning together in the dojo for 15 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like you guys do a really good job of that from over here.
Yeah. So, and then maybe say a little for you, Jayson, of like, well, why don't we also go to like, what do you see? First of all, you made a comment before the call, just like why it's so essential to be able to do healthy conflict and repair in a relationship. Let's just like kind of play with that for a moment.
Okay.
Like, what does that provide in a relationship? I mean, it's so obvious on one level, but it's so not obvious because most people aren't doing it.
Most people aren't doing it. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, my assertion is that successful relationships all have one thing in common, and that's the ability and willingness to work through conflict. And I think relationships that know how to do that are deeper, they're stronger, they're more fulfilling. Because you can bring yourself to the table. You can bring your truth and get messy and trust that it will be cleaned up, and, it's uncomfortable and it's not fun, but partnerships and who can figure this out, I think just do better in life. Actually, the Gottmans, when I interviewed them, said that couples that know how to work through conflict live 10 years longer than couples who don't. I think that's pretty fascinating and illuminating.
Wow. So couples who are in conflict can rest assured that they're getting their reps to extend their lifespan, if not other reasons to do it.
Completely. Yeah. And it's like longevity is a cool new conversation. But I don't know how many of those longevity people are talking about, repair in relationships. It's also health stuff. And I think relationships are a big part of health. And I know with you guys with integrative care, that's a part of your work too,
Yeah, I mean, I think in some of the longevity studies I'm aware of, when you look at like the Centurion studies, they definitely have identified social connection is, one of the key factors to living to an old age. But, there's not a lot of teasing out of like, what does the connection need to look like, right? And
right.
What does that do for you? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the Harvard study that basically that conclusion was your social connections are going to make your life the longest and most meaningful if you have positive, good social connections. But I think it would be interesting to dig a layer down in those studies to learn, like, are people actually learning how to work through conflict? And is that one of their ingredients why they have such a good relationship? I don't know. I'd be curious.
I mean, one thing that I'm, curious about and fascinated by is like, for whatever reason with my blueprint, I think this is true for all of us here. It's like, I came to the conclusion, like, I need to figure out how to have a solid relationship, particularly my partner, right? I need to figure that out. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't want to go through my life just being in pain there the whole time. And that was, I don't know what causes a person to fully say I'm committed to going after that, because I don't know if you guys can relate to it. That's a really, really hard path to commit to, that path of like, I'm going to have, I'm going to find a partner that I'm going to deeply attach to, have a healthy relationship. I'm going to work as hard as I can for that. Like, that's a hard path to commit to. It's an amazing path, but it's not easy. It's actually, in some ways, one of the hardest paths to commit to.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point. I mean, I think this to me brings up the fantasy that people have about relationships, that if you meet the one or find the right person, it should be pretty straightforward. I don't know what you guys think about that, but it hasn't been my experience.
No, it's a lot more work than that. Yeah. And on my side, to kind of parallel what Keith is saying, when I was in my 20s, I had a really traumatic kind of affair type breakup in medical school. And I made a decision in that moment that I was going to compartmentalize, to borrow your word, Jayson. I was going to put my eggs of deep connection and social nourishment in the basket of my friends and deep friendship. And then I was going to find a partner to have children with and not be vulnerable with, because the pain of the betrayal was so intense that I compartmentalized that.
Wow.
I actually wrote that in my journal, and it was really intense. And I kind of, in some ways I created that in my first marriage. And, but it was interesting that, over time, that compartmentalization just didn't work.
Yeah.
It was deeply, it was like there was a crack in the foundation of my life. And I actually couldn't maintain that cognitive kind of compartmentalization just didn't work. And that was really painful for both of us.
I remember some of that for you just from outsider looking in. Because I think what's required there is the compartmentalization and denial of one's own kind of needs, relational needs. Strangely, to be in a relationship, right? It's kind of seems counterintuitive there, but I think a lot of people, you're pretty normal. I think a lot of people find themselves in that type of relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll make it work, and I, this isn't that important. And when I try, it doesn't go well, so I'll just keep, maybe minimizing it, or it's I'm fine, or I'll just get these needs met elsewhere in my friendships.
Yeah, and academically studying attachment theory and secure functioning and reading about it in books. It's like compartmentalized.
Yeah.
the practice, speaking from experience of a younger, newer marriage now, it's the practice of it is way different from the academic study.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think you're right there. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I
like
wrote a freaking book on this thing. I'm still like
right.
a freaking white belt often. Like, wait, how do I do this again?
Maybe you're a yellow belt.
Yeah. Blue. Maybe blue.
No, you're probably a black belt, but there's 10 stripes to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that when I think of the clients I've worked with over the years, there's a lot of people, I think, pendulate in their minds about their relationship as either like, this is just as good as I'm going to get. Like, this is it. This is as good as it gets. Or it's the opposite. Like, anything else would be better than this. Right. And it's like, I think there's this tricky way of like having to dive into what you have in front of you and working it, and not like going into like this whole, like, it's either not right, or, it's like to try and work with the relationship in front of you and not make it a problem and actually work it. I think that's just not a psychology that's really taught culturally.
Yeah.
I think that's like the trick. It's like how to move into that psychology of like, work with what's in front of you before you make conclusions about anything, like try and work yourself and the relationship in front of you, really work it before you just start, constantly like making reasons why you shouldn't work it.
Yeah.
Do you see that a lot?
I do. And people, I think people come up with very elaborate and creative strategies to get through the pain of maybe not getting to zero, what I call zero. Because their zero is like a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. And it's this kind of chronic low grade stress or disconnection that never really gets resolved. I think that's kind of sad. I'm like, and I think we do that because we don't know better. And we also want to belong. It feels bad to be on the outs with someone. It feels bad to be alone. And, but I just, for the listener, I can assure you that it's what we're talking about here is a skill that anyone can learn. If you apply yourself, like Keith's saying, like many years maybe of work, you can apply yourself and actually it can get better and you can create a new baseline. I really believe that.
Well, say a little more about getting to zero and what zero is. I'm assuming you're talking about the concept of repair, but maybe say a little bit more about what that is.
Yeah, I found myself saying this a lot to students and clients that, we're trying to get to zero, which is back to a good place. And if zero is a scale, starts at 0 and goes to 10, 10 being extremely triggered and activated, 5 being somewhere in the middle where I'm upset, but I'm not, I'm not a 10. And it's all kind of a sympathetic arousal state where our scared animal, what I call our scared animal, sort of takes over and is really just doing its job to try to stay connected and protected. And those are tricky to do at the same time. Let's see, I'm going to keep my heart closed and protect myself, but don't go too far away, because it's really threatening for social mammals, I think, to be on the outs. So we avoid and we strategize and dodge and weave. But zero is, I'm introducing people to a fun new concept. It's like zero can be the good place that you aim for. And you don't have to call it zero. You can just call it the good place or whatever you want to call it. But I find number scales being useful for people because most of us can put a number on our level of activation on a scale of 1 to 10. It makes sense.
Want to maybe list some of the qualities of healthy repair and because obviously people say they repair and sometimes they're leaving with resentments that they don't talk about again for 2 months. And what do you think the qualities are of really being at zero and doing a healthy repair and so on?
Yeah, I'd love to answer that sort of directly. I'd love to hear first from you two. What does that look and feel like in your marriages? What does repair in your marriage mean, and what does it feel like, I guess, and look like for you two?
You want to go first?
Sure. I can think of a conflict we had 2 days ago that's relevant here. And I think that in coming out of that, it actually took us until the next day to come through that. It just felt like almost like a birth canal, like a constriction, in my body, in my psychology of, it's just a deep knowing that something hasn't been completely resolved. And when we had the words that we needed to have for each other to understand what each other's perspective was and how we got into it and how we got through it, there was just huge relief and relaxation in my body. It was kind of a vague explanation of a, long-term hours over hours process. But there is that deep knowing that I agree with you, Jayson, that most people can put a number on that scale of like, am I actually at zero? In my personal journey, it's been important for me to go back again and ask, is it true? Am I really at zero?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can tell myself I'm at zero when I'm still at a 2 or a 3. And then if that's the case, I can't communicate, where I'm at with the people I'm with.
Yeah. And then there's a kind of a low grade feeling of something's off, but you don't quite know what it is.
Yeah. It's like a level of activation in my body that I think I recognized as my baseline from childhood of like, this is how I felt. This is what it felt like to be me as a kid. So going below that feels uncomfortable and unfamiliar and weird.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to what is probably true for a lot of people, that like going below that, meaning like to a new baseline that could be even more relaxed and relieved, is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's unfamiliar. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Keith?
Well, it's like one of the thoughts that came to me was a repair I had with Tara, my 3-year-old, which was interesting. A few days ago, it's actually interesting because I was just a little irritable. I woke up, it wasn't a great night's sleep. And she was like asking for a cookie for breakfast. And I was like, yeah, we're not doing that. And so she just immediately like blew up at me. She like screamed right in my face, like, no, I want a cookie for breakfast, and was screaming at me in my face. And she settled a little, and I was just like, yeah, we're going to need to talk about this because that doesn't feel good to me when you freak out on me like that and scream in my face. That hurts. And she was crying and walked away from me. And then, like an hour later, I just told her we're going to talk about this at some point. And she came back to me and was like, she was tracking that hurt me. And she still was able to track it, that like I wasn't even settled in my own system.
Yeah.
And she came back and she just like hugged my leg and was like, I'm sorry, I love you. And I said, thanks for saying that. And then she walked away and it was like done. Right. So for me, I think there's elements of, that's with my daughter, but there's obviously a lot more with my wife, but there's elements of tracking, I think. She doesn't need, my 3-year-old doesn't need to track me. Like, I'm okay if she doesn't. But I think there's an element of like us tracking each other's pain, and knowing that, we're considering each other in the repair. I think being seen for me in my relationship of like, we both have a chance to actually see each other's trigger and just acknowledge it and validate it and not make it wrong, which sometimes I still fail at.
Yeah.
I actually failed last night at that. That's not done yet. I'm still failing at that. So yeah, I think just acknowledging each other's pain. For us, like if we can get through the acknowledging each other's pain and just validating it, seeing each other's perspective as equal, not getting out of the right and wrong thing, acknowledging like, that hurt you. And I don't want to hurt you. Like, that's not really what I want to be doing. And usually for us, we can move through that process, 10 minutes and we're pretty much at the end. The feeling is like, I'm relaxed. I'm not even thinking about the issue anymore. I'm like, for me, I know I'm at zero because I'm in my in my mind, when I'm at 0, if you ask me, like, is that an issue for you at all? I'm just like, absolutely not. I'm done with that. Like, it's not an issue. Like, I can just know, my mind is very sensitive. Like, I'm like, yes, it's still an issue or it's not. So for me, 0 is very obvious in my mind. I'm just like, no, there's nothing there anymore. So that's how I know when I'm at 0.
Yeah.
But I'm more of a switch. I absolutely don't have an issue, or I absolutely do have an issue. So for me, it's just like totally obvious.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for you, Will, it's like more subtle than that.
Way more subtle. And I'm noticing that I'm needing a lot of, it just takes a lot more contact and a lot more time with my wife and I want it and I need it. And it's interesting to notice that the need is much bigger than I ever realized before to actually even be able to recognize what number I'm at. No?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I'm, let's see. For me, I'm very sensitive here. So when I'm not at 0, I definitely know. And I'm usually, some of the symptoms there look like me tracking my partner like a hawk. Like, what's going on over there? And, when I feel we're off and we're not okay, I'm over there a lot. And which has its benefits because I'm sort of tracking the relationship, like, hey, are we okay? But it also has its drawbacks where I can misread her stress as she's upset with me. It might have nothing to do with me. And this is where people get into the weeds sometimes with conflict, is they just a ton of misreading each other.
Mm-hmm. And
that's why it's so important to communicate and actually sit down and be like, are we okay? What do we need to do to get to an okay place? And, it's, and that sometimes takes us days. Sometimes it takes us weeks. Sometimes it takes us minutes. It kind of depends on the issue and what's going on. But it always feels like home to me when I'm in a good place with her. I feel plugged back in to our connection is solid. It's like a generator. There's this generator, and we both plug into it in a secure attachment kind of way. We're like, there's so much nourishment here. And when something's off, it's kind of like we both get unplugged, and life is a little harder and more stressful for me.
Yeah. It's much harder to do the things, to create things and express ourselves when we're not resourced in that really deep, fundamental way.
Yeah, totally. And I'm curious, do you guys have a go-to resource in those moments that will get you to closer to 0? Is there I need to give a reminder, or do you need to be reminded by your partner? Like, is there a go-to kind of lifeline that you reach for and you're like, okay, I got to do this thing that I know will get us to a better place?
Well, I have a newer, it's changed over the years. It's just sort of like, what phase am I in? But my newer go-to thing that absolutely helps me get to 0 quicker, and I think Emma too, which it'll make sense why, is that if we're both triggered, if that's what we're talking about, it's not just one person who's triggered. It's a lot easier when one person's triggered and the other person's just feeling very resourced and open.
Right.
That's a different thing. But that doesn't happen that often when in relationships. Usually one person gets triggered and the other person gets triggered. So the newest thing I've been aware of that somehow is showing up for me is that I'm entering the space of empathy for her more when I'm triggered, of like, wait, what if I maybe it'll help me and my reactivity too, and like not being so much overwhelm and discomfort if I just try and get really what her pain's about. Like, if I just sit with it just for even a minute, like, and I know her so well after 15 years that like I have some pretty good guesses about what the pattern is, right? Of where the pain's coming from. Like, whatever, if it's a childhood pattern or if it's not even a pattern, but I have a good sense of her. So if like, once I can start to understand that, like, I soften so fast, and then she tends to soften because I'm actually listening to her,
right?
Versus like not wanting to listen to her. which is what happened last night. But so it's like, it's, I think for me, it's a really good practice that seems to be happening a little more spontaneously in the last few months of just like, wait, we're both triggered. Let me just see if let me just suspend my own trigger just for a minute or two and just try and take in what's going on for her and where it comes from for her. And just, can I see the picture here? And that disarms me pretty quick, especially because I know her so well. And I could be like, yeah, I'm kind of assuming this is kind of her history here. And I don't need to personalize it so much. And so that's been helping me a lot.
Nice. Love that.
Yeah.
Well, the tool that Krista and I use a lot is, we call it skin time. So skin time is it happens actually a lot when in the transition between work and home at night. It's like I'm usually bringing something that is too fast or too edgy or too intense when I get home from work. This is pretty common. And she'll say, okay, it looks like you need skin time. And I'll say, no, I don't need skin time. She'll say, yeah, that's exactly why you need skin time. And so, I'll just lie down on the couch on my back and she'll lay her body right on mine. And I can feel my heart rate decreasing and my breathing slowing. And it would be fun to check my heart rate variability and see if that's changing.
Right.
I don't have the data, but it feels like I'm getting more resourced. And so on a good day, the conflict becomes a physical downregulation. And it's helpful for us to get out of our heads and not have a conversation when there's a lot in the field. It's actually better for me to get physically regulated. Mm-hmm. It's kind of that bottom up concept,
right?
Bottom up regulation. And then I think the blood flow is probably heading into my frontal cortex more, and then I can actually have a meaningful discussion with curiosity and seeing possibilities that just wasn't possible before downregulating.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, my wife and I do that. Sometimes I like that you guys, it seems like, lead with that. Do you guys do that when you're activated by each other, or is that too fast? Or is that actually the answer?
We've both found a lot more resistance to doing it when the conflict is with each other.
Yeah.
But it still works. And we've definitely done it in those situations. Yeah. It's like getting over the defensive, reactivity enough to be able to get there.
Yeah. I mean, it's like two porcupines trying to lay on top of each other. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm really upset with my wife and I'm really in it, that's the last thing I want to do, right?
Right.
I want to move away. I want her to move away. And yet you're speaking to a really important point of the medicine of co-regulation, interactive regulation, where we can actually more quickly regulate ourselves together versus if you go off to your corner of the house and she goes off to her corner and you both try to kind of get regulated. You can do that, but that's, I think, slower in my experience.
It's slower.
I like it.
It's slower.
Yeah, it's interesting, like just physical contact, right? And like, do you feel like with Ellen that you guys, does it just feel counterintuitive when you're both mad at each other to embrace each other? I mean, or are you guys ever try that where you're just like, let's just try it?
Yeah. Yes to both. Feels very counterintuitive. I usually don't want to do that. She usually doesn't want to do that. And when one of us can just reach and gesture toward the other person in a physical way, like hand on shoulder, hug, hand on leg, hand on back, anything like that is immediately downregulating for me. And I think it helps her as well. So, it's certainly a tool that I think we all need to employ once in a while, is just physical contact in some way. It's because, like Will, you're saying, it's bottom up. There's no words required. you just got to kind of push through the resistance,
Right.
and you'll be surprised at how,
Yeah.
I think these guys are speaking to it, how quickly it can change a state. Yeah, that's true for us.
Yeah, it's a big state changer. And, my whole system when I'm really charged is like, I don't want to be touched. I barely want to be near you, but I'm going to bear down and be near you to talk through this. I'm just going to, it's like my body is actually saying, like, I'm saying the words to connect, but my body internally is actually being like this, closed off turtle. Like I've already pulled my head inside my shell, inside my body. And I'm just like, it's so crazy how that part of the brain, which is probably a very old response system, I would think. It just seems like this part of the brain takes over and is like, it's safer to not be touched right now because I'm mad at you.
Yeah. Right. That's this narrative, right?
Yeah. And the narrative for me is if I let you in, I won't be mad at you anymore. So then I'm not going to get to prove my point. I mean, if I'm really being honest with like what that emotion is saying to me, it's basically like if I just start letting you in, I don't get to stay in my position. I'm going to lose my position. And that, I mean, I think that's an old defense organism strategy. I see it in my 3-year-old. Like, I think it's very primitive strategy of just like, my position's right. It's threatening to not be in my position. So I'm not letting you in,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
if I let her in, then I relax.
You are going to lose your position if you let that person. I mean, that's accurate.
Yes, it's accurate. It's gonna, my position will definitely get compromised in some way.
Right.
Yeah.
Might even evaporate, which strangely a good
happens.
thing.
Right.
Yeah. Usually the things that I get super mad about, I don't care about once we're through the fight. Like, I'm like, whatever. I don't really need that. I mean, usually the things I get mad about are not things that I actually, like, I think differently once the fight's over, which is what's interesting, right? Like, I don't think about it the same way.
Yeah, I think that's true. We're all a little less emotional and we can see more clearly.
Yeah.
One of the things that works for me quickly on repair, I love that we're hanging out on the repair because it feels so vital for people, is just taking responsibility for my part. My part is that like that's immediately relieving to my partner. When I lead with that, or like you're saying, Keith, just listening, like, okay, I want to understand your position, what happened over there. Those two things, if I can lead with one of those two things, it immediately cuts the whole thing in half. Yeah.
Unless the perception is my part is I didn't do anything wrong here. I didn't contribute to this.
It's all you. It can't be me. I don't have that part.
I was just standing here when this happened. Yeah.
I work with people sometimes and they say, well, what if I don't have a part? And I say, well, how about asking your partner what your part is? I bet they have an opinion on that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe we could talk a little bit about the reward of doing the work with a person. And I'm thinking about, we were in a conversation, what was there? We were asked, what's the temperature right now of M and I's relationship? And I was like, it's Hawaii. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? So I just came out of me, it's Hawaii. And I was like, yeah, it's like warm and sunny with a little rain shower most of the time. And then sometimes like this big storm rips through and it's gone. And I think that's like, for me, the reward of 15 years of wrestling and trying to figure out like, how do we just be actual, like full on teammates and collaborators and care about each other's wounds. And like, I think it's the reward is just that I think the dominant space can become relaxation with each other and nourishment and joy and play and
Yeah.
gratitude. To me, that's the reward of doing the work. And it's kind of like hard to like, there's plenty of people who have had that, and there's plenty of people who haven't had that. And it's kind of like, how do you explain like a psychedelic experience to someone who's never had one? It's like, you can't really explain what the result of secure attachment is until you go and earn it. And it's, I've been in this relationship for 15 years. I didn't have that prior to this relationship. So
Yeah.
it's I would just say the reward is powerful. I'm curious what you guys think about how the reward of earning secure attachment has impacted you. And
Yeah, I like what Dan Siegel says. It's like earned security. And that's absolutely true over here. I was not in a secure relationship until my wife and I. And it's been amazing. And actually what creates security is the conflict repair cycle. Strangely, it's arguing, disagreeing, distancing, going through some challenges together and finding our way back. That's what builds security in the parent-child relationship. That's what builds security in my marriage. And I think it's just a constant practice and dojo to keep learning. I'm in another learning phase right now because we're trying to get more efficient with our repair. And man, when we get there, and sometimes it can last weeks and months until we hit another big snag. Sometimes it's only days. But yeah, it just feels great. It feels so good, like anything's possible. It's really the kind of primary feeling is like, wow, I can do anything from this place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the joy that I feel from creating at work every day is a direct result of having that kind of secure home base. I enjoyed my previous career practicing psychiatry quite a bit, and I learned a lot. But there was a seed in me that couldn't sprout until I had the right conditions, more Hawaii kind of climate in my relational world. And so I mean, that in and of itself, I mean, who I am today professionally is just such a big expression of having the right kind of partnership in my life, I would say.
Yeah.
So,
damn.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people listening, I'm telling you, this repair stuff, got to put your attention on that. Huge.
Yeah. I think what you just said, Jason's really important, that you can't say that enough, that the conflict is required for building resiliency.
Yeah.
Because I think, I mean, and I'm just speaking from more of a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Southern upbringing, where avoidance of conflict is in some ways probably similar to your upbringing, Jayson, just how we do things.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're avoiding actually going to the gym and doing the weights. And I didn't know the gym was there. Like I just thought it was a bad place to go, bad neighborhood. You never go in there.
That's funny. Yeah. And Ed Tronick, his work, the guy that did the still face experiment for the listener, it's pretty powerful. And basically he's saying it's the mismatch, kind of misattunement, attunement, reattunement process that builds secure kids and secure relationships and adults who trust their experience. And it's very powerful. And this is cross-cultural. It doesn't matter where you grow up. This is the deal that builds security.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start wrapping up? You want to say a little more about the book and what's on the horizon, and a little bit more about you, and let's do that.
Yeah, I could just say, sure, more about this book. I think it's a really good guidebook for this conversation that we're having here. If you want to take this a step further, the whole book is about the conflict repair cycle and a number of science-informed tools that can help you get back to a good place. And it's very user friendly, lots of exercises, diagrams, it's kind of workbooky and fun. I definitely talk about my own foibles and failures as a way for you to hopefully learn from my mistakes and the people I work with. So I think it's a very solid resource here, and I definitely think that if people can put attention on this part of their lives, they'll have more meaningful and fulfilling lives. Because it's the dance between us human beings that I think creates so much meaning for us. And it feels so painful when we can't figure it out together. And that, I think, should motivate us to learn and put our student hats on and find a way.
Nice.
Beautiful. I'm waiting eagerly for my pre-ordered copy to arrive in the mail.
Awesome.
I want
Thanks
to
for doing
encourage
that.
everyone to check it out.
Yeah, and you can go to gettingtozerobook.com if this comes out before October 5th. If it's after October 5th, you can still go to that page, and there's some freebies there, and there's a conflict quiz you can take to sort of determine your conflict style, and a number of other things.
Nice.
Well, it was great connecting on here with you, and fun, to just explore together about our relationships, which we're exploring together all the time, but to do it on here, it's cool.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for sharing so vulnerably, guys, and openly. I love when we just kind of talk like this. It's always so nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks, Jay.
Okay. We'll send
Thanks,
there.
guys.